Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session on public records law. I appreciate you taking the time for this. I'm kind of looking forward to this. Is one of the last ones. It's been a long week, and I'm really glad for all the folks that have been participating. I think, well, no, at least there's one or two names on here that I'm not quite familiar with, so I will introduce myself. My name is Eric Nussbaum with the Oregon Department of Agriculture. I am the operations specialist, which is a fancy term for meaning I do operational technical assistance to the districts and the managers and the boards, mostly through providing trainings and answering questions all the time. So I love lots of questions. My background is I used to manage the Siuslaw Soil and Water Conservation District a very long time ago, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, before coming to ODA. I was a water quality specialist for about 5 years, and then I started in this job about 10 years. So I've been with ODA about 15 years now. So little housekeeping items before we start. Do please keep your phone or your microphone muted unless you're asking a question, in which case please feel free to unmute your microphone or telephone. You can also ask questions in the chat box at any time. I will be monitoring the chat box. That's why I glance over to my side every now and again. As I said, I do love questions. It's actually where we probably learn the most, is when you folks ask questions about what's happening in your districts or questions about actual situations in your district. I do want to give the caveat that I am not a lawyer. None of this is legal advice. I just give the best advice from my time looking over the laws and reading statutes and working with other districts, working through some of their issues. But if you need legal advice, you definitely need to consult your own lawyer. This, kind of just scratches the surface. This is a little bit deeper than the very short part that was in the new director and the new employee orientation that I did. This is being recorded, and the recording will probably be available sometime next week, but the slide presentation is up on our website. I think I may have the website address at the end of this presentation, but if you just go to the ODA website, look under the SWCD program, and then look for the training tab. There's also a public records tab, and then you can also find some of this information there. Before I start, I want to give a plug for, not for you to purchase this book, the Attorney General's Manual. You should all have a copy of this because we sent it out to every district. And this is where, when I'm asked questions, I go and look for a lot of the answers. This is also great for public meeting law too, because it's both public records and public meetings. So a lot of times when we talk about, all the different exemptions, I can't remember them all, but this is where I go to take a look at them and see if certain records are exempt. All right, the basic law of public record law is that every person has a right to inspect any public record of a public body of this state, except as otherwise expressly provided by blah, 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 blah. And those expressly provided by blah are the exceptions. So it's a very simple law on the surface, but it's pretty complex to follow. So what is a person? So a person is not just a person as we know it, but also a corporation or partnership or an association or a member of a committee of the legislative assembly. So someone from the legislative assembly. What you don't see in here is actually another state agency or local government. So for purposes of public record law, other state agencies and local government are not allowed to ask to inspect public records. You may let them inspect public records. There are some caveats in law, and actually Oregon Revised Statute 568, which hopefully all of you know is the statute related to soil and water conservation districts. There is actually a section in there which allows ODA to inspect your records. So that's an exemption from this what every person is. And there could be, and I don't know for sure, I haven't read all the statutes, but there's quite possibly some other statutes that do allow particular agencies to inspect your records. I'm going to suspect that is in statute that OWEB is allowed to inspect your grant documents, and that's how it's done. It's also part of your grant agreement with them. So the second bullet point there is it doesn't matter why people want to look at your public records, they get to look at your public records. And you know, when we do get public records requests, I do get sometimes folks from districts saying, but I don't like why they are asking for this. They shouldn't get to ask for this. That doesn't matter. They get to ask for it. So the motivation does not really matter for public records requests. So who is subject to the public records law? Well, any public body that is custodian of public records. And I have the definition there, but essentially that is you. You're a custodian of public records because you're a special district, you're a municipality, you're part of local government. So private entities, though, generally are not considered public bodies, even if they're contracted with you. So if you have a contract with a private company, any of the records that are under their control, even though they're doing business with you, are not considered subject to public records law. However, if you have control of a record, for instance, well, a contract, or if you had a private entity do a report for you, do some research and do a report for you, you would have control of that report when it was given to you. All the documentation that they did internally to produce a report, well, that would not be subject to public record law unless they shared that with you. If they ever share it with you, then that becomes under your control. So don't feel like just because you get a public records request, which we'll talk about in the future, that if it involves people who are under contract with you, that you have to go to them for their records. You do not. Only look at the ones that are related to you. So what are the records themselves? So it includes anything that is writing related to conduct of public business, and that you own or use or retain, and it doesn't matter what it looks like. So the best way to think about this is pretty much a public record is anything that you have that is in physical form or electronic form. And writing also includes email, text, and voicemails. And that's important to remember, that sometimes people forget text messages are actually public records. So the thing to remember is that although pretty much anything that you produce, including your post-it notes, your scribbles, your notes, the stuff you do on the edge of an agenda while you're sitting in a boring meeting, which I scribble a lot on, those are probably public records. What we'll talk about is whether or not you actually have to keep those public records, and whether you should keep public records like post-it notes and things like that. Because pretty much everything is considered a public record, it's a good thing to practice for a lot of people, and you'll see this done at the department. I've seen other folks do it. I put all my notes and messages when I write things down in a single little like steno notebook. And it looks like my video froze. So sorry about that. Could someone make sure that you can hear me talking? Can you put in the chat? I just want to make sure you're still getting my vocals. Anyone make sure? Oh, great. Okay, I want to make sure, because my video looks like my video did change, and I'm going to go through here and see if I can get it to come back. Nope. Let's see here. I'm going to change my there we go. Let's see here. It's a little wonky. Oh, I know what I need to do. Okay. There we go. Sorry, it looks like my video froze. So I just changed cameras. Luckily, I have more than one. As I was saying to you, that I keep all my stuff in a steno pad whenever I'm taking notes from conversations, at meetings, everything like that, so that it's easy for me to wrangle all my public documents, since it might be harder to take all those loose pieces of paper and scraps. I do still have post-it notes like almost anyone does, but um, just remember that technically all those little scraps of paper you write on are public records. So you must have a.
Hey, Eric.
Yes.
Sorry, this is Brandon from Marion Soil and Water. We had the question when we do Zoom or like you're doing GoToMeeting, are the chat boxes, do those need to be downloaded and kept as public record?
You know, that's a really good question. And I've heard that question asked before. And to be honest, I don't have an answer. And I think it's probably about time I go find out. Um, I could see where they potentially would be considered public record, especially if you're doing a board meeting and there's some discussion going back and forth. So, especially any kind of public meeting, uh, that would certainly be, if the discussion in there had to do with district business, certainly that would probably have to be retained under both kind of your meeting minutes and public record law. But that's a very good question, and I will look into that to get a definitive answer. The answer has got to be out there somewhere. So thanks for bringing that up. Um, so as the custodian of public records as the district, you have to make sure that you segregate exempt material from non-exempt material, because there are stuff that are exempt, as I said, and there's a long list of exempt materials that you do not have to disclose, or most likely don't have to disclose. Um, and it's your job to make sure that you know what's exempt and what's not exempt. The other important thing about public records and people's right to look at them is you have to provide an opportunity for inspection. And this is actually, it'd be very interesting now to find out. I don't know how this works now with COVID restrictions, but generally speaking, you have to give the public the right to look at the original documents if they'd like to come in. Most time when you get a public records request, um, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. People want them scanned and sent by email, like electronically, things like that. But I do remember on a number of occasions at the Department of Agriculture, there being environmental lawyers sitting in the conference room looking through original CAPO files, confined animal feeding lot operation files, and they were going through them, the original documents, and that was their right. You do need to go through and make sure there's no confidential information you need to redact in those. Um, and so if someone does request to see the original documents, it is also your responsibility to provide reasonable facilities for them to sit down and read them and make abstracts and notes and stuff like that. Is that clear? That usually doesn't happen, but as I said, I've seen it happen at ODA before. Okay. So you have some prerogatives as the public records custodian. You can make some rules and regulations or guidance or policies around how people can look at your documents. For instance, you can say that, if they are going to look at them in person, they have to come during work hours, things like that. You also can, and in some instances should, if you're concerned about exempt records, consult with legal counsel before responding to the request. And most importantly, is you can recoup your costs. They have to be actual costs, and you do need to make sure that you're not trying to make money off of it, because that is illegal, but you can establish fees to recoup your actual costs. And this last one, you will probably often see when you do get public requests that there's often a request to waive the fee or reduce the fee, usually waive the fee if it's in the public interest. By law, if someone can prove they're in the public interest, then you need to waive their fees. And if you don't, they can go to your local district attorney and ask that they respond to that and make you reduce the fees. The general idea thing is that if it's someone who's like a 501c3 or a C6, a nonprofit organization, and they're gonna, and you'll see a lot of times uh, organizations want to get a list of all your employees and how much money their salary is, and post it on a website for the public to look at. That's going to be in the public interest, and as annoying as that can be, and as much work as it shouldn't be that much work, but that's probably where you need to waive their fees. On the other hand, one of the other instances that districts often get is sometimes there are companies who are looking at wanting to know who all your vendors are for whatever reason. It's for a private company. It's probably going to be used for private use. That would be something where you shouldn't waive their fees, even if they do ask for it, because that's for private use, not for public use. Can the fees include the cost of legal counsel to the request? I believe that you're not allowed to include those costs, but I will double check on that and get back to you. Unfortunately, it's more for the cost of doing the research and for doing, if there has to be stuff redacted, but I believe that you can't take the legal costs out, just the copy fees, things like that. But let me get back to you about that. And let's see, there's another question here. We copy chats to emails or Word documents only when the information related to records retention. Yep, that's exactly it. That's very good. Well, you're probably doing it right, because if it's related to anything that you need to retain, then yes, you should keep those chats. And that's why I'm saying if it's probably in a meeting where it's a public, an official public meeting and district business is being discussed and those chats are district business, then definitely. About a project specific, excellent, yes, if it's related to that. So if it's just a get together or maybe even just a training, I don't think you probably have to do that, because probably the back and forth about trainings wouldn't have to be. But I am going to check on that. Okay, so if you're going to, well, no matter what, even if you do want to ask for fees, you do have to have a policy, a records retention, a public records request policy. That's one of the policies that's required by law, and that has to show who is going to respond to your public records request. There has to be a point of contact that's required, what the fees are and how they're calculated, and then what's your process for getting back to them. Special District Association of Oregon has some great templates for that. Other districts have some. I have some copies of other districts. They're not that hard to write. They're fairly basic, but you do need to make sure you have them. One of the most important reasons that you want to have them is if you do get a public records request, you want to have the fee schedule set up. You can't just get the request and suddenly pass a policy. You need to have that policy in place before you get the public records request so you can charge the fees. Recently, the law changed as far as the timeline. It used to be rather vague, and then they've made it tighter, and then they've made it tighter again. So this should be in your public records request policy. It shows that you have to acknowledge receipt within 5 days, or let them know that you don't have those records. Within 10 days, you either have to provide the records, especially if it's just a really simple request, 1 or 2 things. I always suggest if it takes you like less than like 10 minutes to put together, which often those are. For instance, for most districts, figuring out, when you have like 2, 3, 4 employees and they just want to know the employee's name and how much they made, that should take you less than 15 minutes if you use QuickBooks. You run a report in QuickBooks and you just, cut and paste the names and how much they made in the last year. Super easy. But you need to, within 10 days of acknowledging receipt, so a total of 15 days out at the most, you need to provide the records. or ask for clarification and explain why it might take longer if longer than 10 days. If your fees are going to be greater than $25, you need to provide an estimate to the requester. You can ask for advance payment, and that's fine. And then when they get you back the payment to you, then you've got the rest of those 10 days to finish up getting the records or explaining why it might take longer. If you don't get a response to them about a fee or clarification, you can close a request after 60 days. So these are the new dates and stuff that in the last couple of years with the amount of time. So that's kind of the whole process there. Any questions so far? We are going through this very quickly. All right, so what kind of stuff is exempt from disclosure? Well, as you on the east side know, you know, there was a law passed recently about sage grouse conservation plans. Those are some kind of things. Medical records, some particular criminal records or investigation records. There's all these things like that. Normally, those are not things that you have to deal with. But some of the ones that you do sometimes get is about employees' residential and personal information. And those are generally exempt. Not their name, not how much they're getting paid, not where their work location is, anything related to actual work. That is usually not exempt. The other thing, just to let you know, as we've been discussing lately, is that for elected officials, for your board of directors, their home address, phone number, and date of birth, and you know, I have no idea why their date of birth is included in this, is not exempt unless they can claim a personal safety exemption. Personal safety exemptions are laid out very specifically in statute. They say exactly how it has to be done. Someone has to write out in writing, email's fine, but in writing they have to request the exemption and they have to explicitly state what the personal safety issue is. And then in statute there is a list of reasons why you need to compare and see if it actually qualifies. So, and then if that happens, then that exemption actually is only for a specific length of time. It's not indefinite, and it needs to be renewed. So, at some point, if you ever get a public records request and it's not obvious, feel free to give me a call or send me an email, and we can talk about it. And I'm very glad to go over it. And then if I can't give you an answer, then we will go ahead and, you know, maybe you want to consult legal counsel or special districts or something like that. So I'm going to put in a little plug here about one thing, and that is, you know, when we first started getting public records requests about 5 or 6 years ago for some details of like list of vendors, salaries, and some other things. I literally would spend more time on the phone with a district manager trying to explain why they had to do it than the amount of time that it would take to do it. In good public policy, you may not like the fact that folks are asking you for some things, but I would highly encourage you to just go ahead and instead of taking the time to complain about it or do a back and forth about whether they owe you money for something that really will only take you 10 or 15 minutes, just go ahead and do what's good public policy and you know, do the public records request and fill it out and get the information to them. When you really think about what they're asking for, it doesn't really often take that long. The other thing I want to talk about is that you don't have to create any kind of new document for a public records request. So if someone asks for you for, let's say, they want a list of all your purchase order numbers, but you don't do purchase order numbers. You don't have to create purchase order numbers. If they ask for you know, a list of vendors and their addresses, but you don't, you know, have their addresses on file per se, you know, because you pay electronically. You don't have to look for those addresses to give them. You know, if you can print something out in QuickBooks, an easy record like that, you need to do that. But you don't have to create a brand new record in order to do that. Sometimes vendor, you know, a request might come and you might have to say, oh, I have to do this report and that report and put all these into another report. If that record doesn't exist, you don't have to create a new record from a whole bunch of other records. If the information they want is spread across several records, you send those several records to them. It's their job to consolidate them into a single record, and not yours. You don't have to create something new. So just be aware of that. So a lot of times, as I said, think about what they're asking, think about what the law says, and don't make too much work for yourself. Just answer, you know, directly their public records request. Any questions at all about that? All right, well, this is going very fast. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was public records retention. How many of you, you know, we don't have to do hands and you're all very quiet, but all of you need to have a public records retention policy. Along with your public records request policy, your public record retention policy is also required by law. You can use the state guidelines. The state in statute has the minimum amount of time you have to retain records, and you can use that. But you, for some reason, you may want to have a policy to retain records longer than the states, and in order to do that, you need to have your own policy. There are districts out there that like to keep project files for longer than what the state schedule is. So therefore, you need to have that in your own retention schedule. So as I said before, pretty much everything you make is a public record. Anything you write down and jot and create, and text messages and voicemails and emails and everything like that. So what you want to make sure that you do is you don't keep things you don't need to keep. So because if you do have them, then you have to disclose it. But if you don't have it, you don't have to. So one of the great examples of this is voicemail. If you keep a voicemail is a public record, and you might have to transcribe it and disclose it if there's a public records request. But if you look at the retention schedule, it says voicemails can be deleted right away. So you should delete voicemails right away. If there's some important information about what was in that voicemail, you could, you know, write down the phone number, you know, in your little notebook where you keep everything. Then of course you do have to keep that for as long as the retention schedule says. In order to keep the amount of information down that has to be disclosed, or information, you know, the funny drawing you wrote on an agenda and stuff like that while you're at the meeting, you should get rid of those when you can. You should become familiar with what you can get rid of right away, and familiar with the basic kind of correspondence that you should be getting rid of. I have down there, throw a shredding party once a year. And that's because you can accumulate a lot of public documents and never actually, you know, forget to take the time to go through them. So there are a few districts. I'll get to that in a second, Lisa. You get together once a year as a district and, you know, go through all your documents for the last year and see, you know, go through the retention schedule and see what you are able to get rid of. And that way you don't accumulate them all. Lisa says, be careful of the format used to store records. As far as heard, scanning and storing documents is not accepted. Is this still correct? Yes, well, so what definitely cannot be scanned, and actually there's even a caveat to that, is that you can't scan and store your minutes in that form. Minutes have to be kept in a physical form. As far as other documents, the issue with scanning and storing them electronically is being able to retrieve them and ensuring that you have backup copies. Now, of course, you know, a lot of your documents may only be electronically and never show up physically. And so obviously having a backup of your documents is really important in that case. As far as scanning and storing, the state archives does have a service now where they will scan and store your documents for you, including your meeting minutes, and that is an acceptable way of keeping even your minutes. They have done the research and they have found a system that they work and has been approved for that purposes. It is very expensive. I think there is one district who was thinking about doing it, and I don't know if they ended up doing it because of the cost. So if you do scan and store your documents, you just got to be careful about losing whatever format. And remember, you know, like floppy disks, I mean, you know, you don't have those anymore. I remember when I was at the SWCD, I backed up stuff on zip drives. If you remember zip drives, well, who has a zip drive holder anymore, you know, reader anymore? What will happen to USBs eventually? So when you think about storing things electronically, you got to make sure that they will be able to be read into the future. And then also you got to think about backup, not just for your district being able to do business, but also be able to retain these records. So I hope I answered that question, Lisa. The scanning and storing of the documents, I believe, has mostly to do with meeting minutes. Any other questions about that until I have one last thing I wanted to say? All right. So the last thing I wanted to say has to do with something that I go over with new directors and new employees, and that's the use of personal devices to store records. So when you use your personal phone and you use it for text messages, or you use your personal email for district business, and that's usually directors that use their personal email. When there are public records requests, you have to go through all your text messages, you have to go through all your personal email to see if there's any kind of document related, an email related to that particular public records request. That's more of just a pain to go through sometimes. But on the other hand, too, is you know, if you have text messages on your phone and it's a personal phone, you got to make sure never to delete them until you get to the end of the public retention schedule, public record retention schedule for a lot of those. But the part that I'd like to warn, especially directors who use their personal email, is that if by any chance there is litigation involved, the district gets sued, and districts do get sued for projects that go the wrong way. If there is a subpoena for all the records related to a particular subject, then they can subpoena your email accounts, including your personal email accounts. So in that case, you should, they would actually be able to get into your email account, ask for your password, and get in there and search all your emails, or get to your phone to search all your text messages. And I don't know anyone who wants to do that. So I always encourage district directors to go and get a separate email account. Gmail accounts are easy if the district doesn't issue ones under their own domain name, but certainly district directors should have a separate email account. The other thing is that when you are sending emails around to each other about one of the best things to do about who should retain a record, you know, who owns that record, it's usually the sender that owns that record. So in that case, you should have the sender be the one to retain that record, and whoever receives that email is the one that can delete it. If you're receiving email from outside, then whoever your own organization, then whoever receives that email is the one that should retain it. Question here, Jenny is asking, if you operate your social media and it's tied to employee profile, are those open to public records as well? I don't think, my understanding is that the employee's personal Facebook account would not, but certainly the SWCD's page would be. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if that will hold up in court, but certainly the SWCD social media page would be. So the employee would have to be careful, as well as like a director, if it's a director that has it, that on their personal page, their personal stream, social media stream, that they weren't writing anything that could be construed as a district document. Probably would not be, but you just got to make sure that you wouldn't actually put anything on there. A director might need to be a little more careful if they're making public comments. That's their right, but it depends if it has to do with district business. So it's a little vague, but and I'm not 100% sure, but my understanding, because I did hear about this question once before. So this is why I'm saying I'm not a lawyer, and things change all the time, and a lot of these things change based on legal cases or attorney general opinions. So that actually was my really basic presentation for today. Just going in a little bit deeper than what I did for the new director training, for those that want to know. I'm always happy to answer questions outside of here with particular document issues and certain documents you might have. I will go through and I will ask about the Zoom chats, and then I think I know where to look and double check about the legal counsel from where I remember that. So I'll be glad to do that too. So any other questions from anyone? No?
Yeah, hey Eric, this is Michael with the Coos Soil and Water Conservation District. Hi, at the beginning of the call, you mentioned the Attorney General Guide, and I think you said that that is included in the packets that you deliver to the district, so that those can be provided to directors. Was that? Did I hear you correctly?
No, we provided one copy to every district, because we purchased them. They're actually kind of expensive. They're about $35. So you should have one in your district. They also are online. If you go to the Attorney General's webpage, you could just Google Oregon Public Record Law, and it will actually take you to a web page where you can actually, it's all divided out by chapter online too. Often I use that. So if you want to look at it directly, otherwise your office should have a copy that we sent to them.
Understood. Okay, thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome. Any other questions at all? Oh, no, looks like we did that. The latest public year is June 2019. They generally come out every 2 years. Any other questions? All right. Well, this will be online, and I'm glad you liked the training. And I have appreciated everyone who has attended my different trainings. Have a great rest of the day. I have one more new director training this evening, and then one for managers tomorrow. And this training week is done. All right, everyone, have a nice day. Take care.